Welcome, everyone. On behalf of the Better Business Bureau and AARP, we welcome you to today's Twin Cities ScamJam. First, I want to welcome Marti Diliema to the stage. Thank you so much, Marti. Can we give her a warm welcome?
Great. Hi, everyone. Yeah. Good morning. Thank you for having me. My name is Marti Diliema. I am an assistant professor at the U. I'm on the St. Paul campus. And I'm a gerontologist. So my training is in aging, but really my focus is in fraud and scams. And what is it about the aging process and the aging brain that might make us more or less susceptible to deception? So I'm going to start my slides here. In today's presentation, I'm going to talk to you about some recent trends that we're seeing in both types of scams as well as methods of money transfer that the scammers are now demanding. I'm also going to talk about risk factors and some of those aging risk factors. And then I'm going to talk about what to do if you or someone you care about has experienced a scam. So let's start with the trends. This is data that I compiled from the Federal Trade Commission. The Federal Trade Commission runs the largest consumer complaint database in the world. It's called the Consumer Sentinel. And this is the prevalence of two types of reports of fraud. We have government imposter scams in the orange and business imposter scams in the blue. And you can see that really big peak there in 2019. I want to see a show of hands. How many of you received a call from someone who claimed to be associated with the IRS? Okay, take a look around. Now, how many of you have received a phone call from someone who's claimed to be associated with the Social Security Administration? Okay. So this SSA scam might have been the most prevalent scam in America. Approximately half of American households were exposed to this scam in just a 3-month period. But then the scams took a hit. You can see that big low point there. So it wasn't just us who had to find a way to work from home in the early shutdown of the pandemic. Scammers also had to restart their operations from their homes. But then we see kind of this crossover here. See where that blue line kind of takes over for the orange line? When we were at home, avoiding the grocery store, avoiding the markets, we started using Amazon. That business imposter scam was largely driven by the Amazon imposter scam. Has anyone received a text message or an email from Amazon when it probably wasn't Amazon? Almost all the hands in the room are up. So these are really, really prevalent scams. So I urge us to be really cautious with following through with any sort of text message or phone call from anyone who's claiming to be a government agency or a business. Also, I should say that the business imposter scams, that includes your tech support, like this is Microsoft, this is Apple, and your bank impersonation scams. So one of the concerning things that we see is that even if older adults do not report fraud at the same rates as middle-aged individuals, when they do report a scam, their losses tend to be magnitudes greater. So you can see from this chart that 80-year-olds report median losses of $1,800, compared to around $500 to $600 for younger adults. So the next trend I want to talk about is money transfer methods. What are scammers asking you to do in order for them to get money? So gift cards are still a major way that criminals are getting money from older adults. Why do we think criminals and scammers like gift cards? Well, they're easily available. You can go into any store, pretty much, any big box store, Walmart, Target, and buy gift cards. They can be instantly redeemed from afar, and they're anonymous. All those three combinations are what make scammers just fall in love. So gift cards are still a major issue. But a new thing is cryptocurrency. Now, I want to see another show of hands. You can tell I like that. I want to see how many of you think you really, really have a good grip, you really understand how the blockchain works, right? Even I don't, I kind of look at this and I study this and I don't even understand it. That's a great, this is another area that scammers love because fraud breeds in complexity. When things are hard and hard to understand, that is an open playing field for criminals. So there's another method that's in 2022. And what you can see is that cryptocurrency has exploded, and so has bank transfers. A bank transfer is like a direct transfer out of your checking account to someone else's checking account. A big player in this field is Zelle. Have people heard about Zelle? Maybe you've used Zelle. Zelle is a great tool if you're, a parent of a college-age kid and you need to transfer them money every month. Or it's a great tool if, your family lives overseas and you regularly want to make deposits from your checking account into theirs. But it's also a tool that's used by scammers. I'm going to play you a quick news clip that really explains how scams using Zelle are working. So if you can go ahead and roll the clip.
The free payment app Zelle is making news, but for all the wrong reasons. It seems every week there's a new report of someone saying that they've been scammed out of thousands of dollars.
So consumer reporter John Marti shows how you can protect yourself.
Zelle is an easy way to send money, but scammers are using it more and more often to steal your money.
I was contacted by someone from a Wells Fargo phone number that told me that they were a Wells Fargo representative and that I had fraud.
Megan McDonald received a text that appeared to come from her bank. Panicked, she gave her account info and lost $3,000 through a Zelle transfer. Last year, Katina Brown fell victim to the same text.
It's saying, did you try to Zelle $5,000? And I was like, no.
She gave her account number and lost $1,000. Damon Lander was another victim.
They changed my username, my password, changed my card PIN, set up a Zelle account.
Now, Zelle is run by major banks and is actually very safe from hacking. But in almost all these cases, a customer was convinced through a phone call to give their personal account information to a scammer. Sarah Wetzel with the Better Business Bureau says scammers know peer-to-peer payment services like Zelle and Venmo are convenient. But unlike credit cards, there's little fraud protection.
It's the same old scams that we see. It's just they're asking for payment in different ways.
She says look out for these red flags. The person contacting you is pushy or aggressive. They insist there's no other way to fix the problem, or their message has grammatical errors. Because if you're scammed,
these peer-to-peer payment services are not going to shoulder any losses for a consumer. If you do get scammed out of money, the chances of you getting that back is very unlikely.
So how do you keep this from happening to you? Only use money transfer apps with people you know. If the person needs your account info, look up the bank's phone number yourself and call them. Chances are your bank will say there's nothing wrong, and that way you don't waste your money. I'm John Marti.
Great. So you can see from that clip that scammers use social engineering. Often these scams start out, you think you're talking to your bank. So it's a bank impersonation scam. And they often make you think that you're Zelling money, you're transferring money to yourself from like your checking to your savings. So these scams also sometimes involve the criminals remoting into your computer, telling you to download some software so they can get in there. Again, you think that it's your bank, so you trust them. So be really, really wary. Another reason why scammers love Zelle is because it's built in to many of our bank accounts. I mean, if you bank at Chase, Wells Fargo, Bank of America, Zelle is a product that is embedded in your online banking. And the transfer limits per day are, upwards of $5,000. So again, you can lose a lot of money pretty instantaneously using Zelle. Okay, so I want to talk about vulnerability risk factors next. Many of us assume, and this is, kind of a stereotype, that older adults are more susceptible to scams than younger adults. And here are some of the risk factors that you often see cited. Diminished cognitive capacity, loneliness, social isolation. Scammers are out there, they're looking for an unmet need. And if you're lonely, if you're isolated, scammers can offer to fill that unmet need. They can offer companionship, romantic interest, get you something to look forward to, maybe like a big prize or a lottery winning. So I think social isolation and loneliness kind of play into that. Another thing is, people say, well, older adults, they're not sophisticated with technology, so they're more likely to, fall for these digitally mediated scams. And there's like limited evidence that that might be the case. In fact, sometimes when people are not very familiar with a technology, they actually avoid it, and they're more risk averse. So we can't really put a lot of stock into that explanation. But here's another one, and this was talked about earlier, is about more assets to exploit. Currently, older adults hold 70% of our nation's wealth. 70%. In 20 to 30 years, we're about to embark on the largest wealth transfer ever to be seen. So if you're a savvy criminal, who are you going to go after? The broke 20-year-old or the retiree who's sitting on a $2 million nest egg, right? So it could be a mere exposure issue. Older adults are exposed to more fraud. They're at home where the phone is ringing. So these are some of the factors at play. But I want to talk about the aging brain. Like I said, I'm a gerontologist, and this is something that's really interesting to gerontologists. There's a lot of movement being made in treatments and drugs for Alzheimer's disease. And I have some colleagues at Rush University in Chicago that run a longitudinal panel study. So that means they follow the same people over time. So to be in their study, you have to be cognitively healthy at baseline. So when you're first enrolled, no evidence of brain pathology, healthy. So that's at the start. And then every year you come into the lab and you spend hours with them, and they do a full battery of cognitive tests on you, memory tasks, executive functioning tasks. And here's what they found. At about year 7, I'm going to use my clicker here. 22, I have to go to the next slide. 22% of the participants had Alzheimer's disease or dementia, so about a quarter. I want to say that the starting age for the study, on average, was 79 years old, so at the beginning. So these are an older group of people. 78% of them showed no signs of Alzheimer's disease or dementia. Some of them were starting to enter into the mild cognitive impairment stage, but really these people were able to care for themselves. They were independent, just mild or no cognitive changes. Here's the concern. 30 to 40% of the people on that top line, the people who are aging without disease, were still showing substantial declines in areas of decision making. So the researchers also gave them tasks related to making choices about a health insurance product or making investment decisions, and they were not performing well on those tests. Here's another research study that was done by a different set of researchers. They administered a really short 5-question financial literacy quiz to adults of different ages, from 60 into their 90s. And you can see overall, I'm just going to say it, Americans, we have terrible financial literacy. Even out of these 5 questions, you can see that people are only getting like 3 out of the 5 correct. But in addition to trying to answer those questions, the researchers also said, now tell me how confident you are that your answer is correct. And what you see in this graph is this widening gap over the life course between actual financial literacy, like how you performed on this quiz, and how you think you performed on this quiz. So the blue line shows, that 80-year-olds are getting like 1 out of the 5 questions correct. But look at how confident they are in their answers. They think they're doing well. So this gap right here, that is the gold mine for scammers. It's the difference between how you think you're doing, but how you're actually doing. It's where you lack insight that your capacity has declined. And scammers love that because it's a time in your life when your friends, your family members, people who care about you, probably haven't stepped in to take over your finances. So you still have autonomy in your decision making. And that's what scammers are looking for. Someone who doesn't have a lot of cooks in the kitchen, not a lot of people involved in managing their affairs, and who think they're okay, who think that everything is fine, but really there are changes that have taken place. So that earlier group of researchers I mentioned who ran the longitudinal study of aging, they administer a scam susceptibility questionnaire every year to their participants. It includes behavioral questions, like do you answer the phone whenever it rings, even if you don't know who's calling, and other types of belief and mindset questions. And they find that people who scored poorly on that scam susceptibility measure, meaning they're more susceptible, over time were 3 times more likely to develop Alzheimer's disease. So this issue of scam susceptibility, it's almost like a predictor of future Alzheimer's disease. So I share this with you all to say is that it's not just people with Alzheimer's disease or dementia who are at risk. There are changes that happen in the brain that are fairly universal, not everyone, that impact executive functioning, the frontal lobe part of the brain, that cause changes in our decision making, our ability to tell if someone is being truthful or deceptive, our ability to understand risks and consequences of a decision that are impacted earlier in the life course, closer to the 70s, that can impact our susceptibility. And if you're very susceptible at a young age, that could predict future development of Alzheimer's disease. So I don't want to put all the emphasis on the brain, right? There's other things that play a major role in scam susceptibility, and these are factors that can happen to people at any age. But we know that in later life, there are some events that happen that create these contexts of vulnerability. And those are major life events. They're hospitalization. They are the loss of a spouse. They're retiring, even if it's a positive event. They're moving from home into an assisted living facility. All of those events, we're not operating at our peak performance. We might be stressed out. We might be trying to get our bearings. We might be grieving a loved one. Again, this is a gold mine for scammers. If they can get you at a time when you're most vulnerable. I've been doing a lot of interviews with victims of gift card scams, and I can't tell you how many of those people we talked to that said, if they had called me at a different time, I would have immediately known that this was BS, but I had just fallen on the ice. My head was ringing, or, I had just, experienced a loss, or I lost my job. So they find you at these moments when you're most vulnerable, and that's when they make their pitch or their request. So what do we do? Well, I want to just start by saying financial exploitation, both when it's a friend or a family member who's the exploiter, or fraud when it's a stranger, are so hard to address, both for friends and family and for the individual. First of all, it's hard to detect. We are private about finances as a society. Americans are very private about their money. So it's hard. It's hard for family members to know what might be going on. Also, fraud criminals work really hard to build your trust. And many times, they convince you, the victim, to trust them more than you trust the actual people who love you and care about you in your life. Another issue is that there's little recourse available in many cases. It's hard to recover from fraud. It's hard to get that money back. And that also makes people feel like, I'm not going to bother reporting. What's the point? Another issue is that sometimes victims don't want an intervention. We see this a lot in financial exploitation, where the abuser is a family member, a friend, or a daughter, or a son. Those people might be also providing care to the older person. And removing them from their life means that older person needs to go into an assisted living or nursing home. So to them, that punishment is worse than living in a known exploitative situation. They would rather have their daughter, skim off the top than to have it mean that their daughter is taken away. And that might be a rational decision. And we can debate long and hard about whether, who's right in that case. So that really just brings me to this final point, is that there becomes this trade-off between autonomy and protection. And we see that with all sorts of new tools and technologies. Think about Zelle. Zelle is so easy. It's so efficient and convenient. But if we put up more barriers and we make it harder to use Zelle, we've just experienced this trade-off. It's safer now, but now we don't really want to use it. Now we have less independence and autonomy. So we see that in people's personal lives as well. So what do? How do you support someone? Raise your hand if you've ever, had a friend or someone confess to you that they've experienced a scam. Okay, so the majority of us. So I want to talk about kind of the steps and how to support that person. The first one is the hardest. Avoid judgment. So when that person came to you, how many of you, and please be honest, was your first thought or even statement out of your mouth was, how could you have done that? Or how is that not obvious to you, right? Like, oh, what were you thinking? They don't need to hear that from you because those are the messages they're telling themselves. In all of my interviews with individuals who have experienced a scam, self-blame is at the top. That's the predominant emotion and reaction. So avoid judgment. That's really the most important thing. And then just listen. How do they define what happened? Let them tell the story. You don't need to insert your own, perspectives and commentary the whole time. Just listen. The other thing we should do is, we should remind them, and this is so helpful for people to hear, that these criminals are really good. They're really good at using social engineering and convincing us in something that isn't real, and that person is not alone. We have to recognize the trauma associated in fraud victimization and treat it like a crime, which it is. Help them report, really work with them to contact their bank, their credit card company, whatever entity it was that did that money transfer. Next, I think another important thing is sometimes when we're in the scam, people have described it to me as like I was in the ether. It was just my reptilian brain. Like I wasn't thinking. I was up in the clouds. They almost, when it's over, they're like emerging from this state. Like, what was that? What happened? And sometimes we give over information to the criminals, and we might not even recall doing it, but like our social security numbers, access to our devices. So the person might need help changing their passwords and even freezing their credit. Another thing is to do the other types of reports that are helpful, like to the Federal Trade Commission, if it's an investment scam, to the Securities and Exchange Commission, also to the Internet Crime Complaint Center, which I'll talk about briefly. And then also just say, hey, if anything comes up that you're just not sure about, anything suspicious, please just call me first. Before you make a decision, just get in touch with me. And then finally, really help them identify someone that they trust to get more involved in their financial affairs if you're concerned about them moving forward. Like if you're thinking, this might be the sign of something bigger, I'm noticing other changes going on, leaving the stove on, or getting lost or getting into little accidents, this might be a time to kind of activate that financial power of attorney document and get someone involved. So reporting. First of all, I want to urge all of us to report. Reporting is essential. The federal law enforcement and local law enforcement cannot investigate a crime they did not know occurred. Even into the big Federal Trade Commission Sentinel, that tells law enforcement what the trends are. Should they be focusing on robocalls this year and passing legislation to try to prevent that? Or should they be going after money movers or money mules more domestically? Like it gives policymakers, identify what they should target. But here's what I want to say. If it's within 24 hours or pretty much at any time, do not sleep on a fraud. Contact your bank, your credit card company, your financial institution immediately. Say, I have experienced a crime, I'm a victim of a fraud, and also contact the IC3. I put the web address in there. IC3 works with the FBI, and if the crime is reported quickly enough, and if it's above a certain amount, they might be able to reverse the wire, reverse the transfer. Operation Kill Switch. Can we get that money back? They can contact the financial institution, the receiving financial institution, to see if they can claw that money back. Time is of the essence. You are racing the clock in these situations. So if you can contact those two entities, the bank or the financial institution and IC3, and explain the crime, there's a chance. There's a chance. And I'm not a person to be able to guarantee this, but these are the first places you should report. Then file a report with the Federal Trade Commission as well, or the SEC, whatever entity, depending on the type of crime. So one more show of hands. This is my kind of end session. I just want to talk about chronic victimization. I want to see in the audience anyone who knows anyone in their life who really struggled with persistent financial victimization and fraud, where a simple conversation with that person could not get them to stop the behavior of sending money to criminals. Does anyone have anyone like that in their life? Okay, I see like 4 or 5 hands. Serious and persistent cases are hard for victim advocates. They're hard for law enforcement. So I want to tell you about a law in Minnesota. We're one of fewer states that has this law. It's called Chapter 45A. And it mandates a financial institution to put a temporary hold on a person's account if they're concerned that that person is, essentially sending money to criminals or has a perpetrator stealing money from that account. The hold is temporary. It only lasts 3 weeks. It can be extended an additional 2 weeks to up to 5 weeks. And why those temporary account holds are important is we say it's stopping the bleeding. It's stopping the loss of funds. So it keeps them safe. It gives family members, friends, law enforcement time to get involved and to figure out what this person needs. And it also, if it's a scammer from overseas, 5 weeks is a long time for them to wait to get their money, so they might move on to other targets. So who's appropriate for a temporary hold? It's people who are victims of financial abuse by maybe their power of attorney, someone who has all their hands in their accounts and is hard to prevent and hard to stop. And it's also persistent and chronic fraud victims who are you cannot stop them from continuing to give money or send money to the perpetrators. Here's how you can request a temporary hold. You can file a report. Anyone can do this. You can be a neighbor, you can be a family member, you can be a police officer, you can be an adult protective service worker or a social worker. You report to the Department of Commerce. And I put the web address there. It's best to be as complete as possible in your report. A lot of times it's financial institutions that are doing the reporting, which makes sense. They have kind of a view of someone's spending that we don't. Here's what will happen. The Senior Financial Fraud Ombudsman at Department of Commerce will take that report. He'll read that report. He'll get in contact with you, likely, the reporter. He'll get in contact with the person who is the alleged victim. He'll try to coach them, talk to them, help them understand the risks of this behavior or what's going on. He might cross-report to law enforcement, to Adult Protective Services if he's worried about this person's safety. And then also, he might encourage the financial institution to try to find someone like a family member, to get involved with that person's financial decision-making. And then last, he'll decide if a temporary hold is necessary to keep this person safe. So I just want to end, and I want to also mention, temporary holds are soft. You can still pay your bills. You can still, make sure that your caregivers are paid for their time. It's just preventing those massive transfers, like the wiring money to Nigeria. That's not going to be allowed. So it's a soft hold. So I just want to end with saying, what do we do? How do we keep ourselves safe? How do we keep our loved ones safe? Please report, and don't sleep on it. Report right away, especially to IC3 and your financial institution. And then if a simple conversation is not enough to get someone to stop the behavior or get the perpetrator off of someone's back, it's often they're responding to scams because the scammer is meeting an unmet need. It's the criminal that's calling them every day and asking, how are you? How are your grandkids? It's the criminal that's making them feel romantically desired or giving them hope that they're going to be a millionaire. So you can't just say, stop talking to that person. You need to replace the behavior. Can you get this person more involved in their community, in their church or their religious organization? Can you introduce them to new hobbies? And then let's not forget the trauma associated with being a victim of fraud. It's not just, helping someone start up again and learning to live on a lower income. It's also, do they need mental health counseling? Do they need tax assistance around tax time? Do they need legal help? And do they need someone to advocate for them, to call up their financial institutions, to call up creditors and say this person has been a victim of a crime? So I just want to thank you for your time. If you have any questions or you want those reporting information and those websites, please come to me. I'll give you my business card. Thank you so much.
Now we want to go a little deeper. We're going to bring up Marti Peterson from Minnesota Elder Justice Center. What she's going to get into is to talk a little bit more deeply about financial exploitation in those settings with loved ones and those that are known. It's a very difficult topic, and the Minnesota Elder Justice Center does an enormously good job helping the community identify these issues and providing them a wide variety of resources on the legal side, on the financial side. And they have been longtime partners with the Better Business Bureau and AARP. Please help me welcome Marti Peterson.
Hi, good morning, everybody. Thank you so much. I'm so pleased to be here, and I'm just very, very grateful to have been invited to be with you today. I'm just going to wait for a second. I think I've got a slide set that's going to pop up on the screen here in just a moment. Good morning. I'm so glad again to be here with you today, and I'm so grateful to hear from Marti this morning. Marti, thank you so much. I'm grateful to know this really critical information about scams and frauds and the way that they are playing out for people that we care about in our lives around Minnesota and beyond. Let me make sure that I understand how to operate. Excellent. Success. All right. So as Lisa shared, I'm from the Minnesota Elder Justice Center. My name is Marti Peterson. I'm the associate director there. And I'm an attorney, so my perspective on scams and frauds and the impact that these events have in people's lives come from working with families to do planning in an effort to avoid these kinds of experiences or in response to these kinds of experiences. And so that was my experience before I joined the Minnesota Elder Justice Center. And now working with the Minnesota Elder Justice Center, we work in a variety of ways that I'll talk a little bit more about. But I just wanted to share some of my themes with you this morning. Lisa shared that I'll be talking a little bit about financial exploitation and what happens when a person experiences loss at the hands of an individual with whom they have a relationship. And in doing so, we'll be talking a bit about self-determination, how people make choices and decisions about their resources, and how they make choices about who will help them make decisions about their resources. We're also going to be talking a little bit more about oversight and what it means to help somebody else with financial decision making. So I'll talk about some tools that are related to that might be familiar to you just in a general way, and I'll talk a little bit about how those tools work in a legal context. I do want to acknowledge the work of others who have contributed to the perspective that we have on this at the Elder Justice Center. And then I do want to also talk a little bit about our organization and what we do. Here's our mission, and when we do this work, we generally focus on public awareness, which is what we're doing here today, talking with folks in the community about how to learn more about preventing and responding to abuse, neglect, and financial exploitation. We also do it through professional education. We engage in public policy advocacy, and so we try to make sure that we have laws here that support older adults and vulnerable adults in Minnesota and their safety and autonomy. And we also do this work through direct service support. So we operate a helpline at the Minnesota Elder Justice Center, and there we can do some of those action plan making strategies with you if you ever need them. Marti talked about making an action plan at the end of her presentation in response to concerns about scams and frauds. So if you need that support, you can reach out to the Minnesota Elder Justice Center, and we can help you talk through that action plan, what you might need, the other professionals that you might need to be in contact with, such as attorneys or other forms of support. So please feel free to reach out to us at the Minnesota Elder Justice Center on our helpline. This is the contact information for our website and for our helpline as well. And I just share that our services on the helpline are provided free of charge. We don't charge any fee or money for information that we share with you over the helpline service. So please feel free to use that. When we do helpline support, if somebody calls us because they're concerned about either themselves or someone in their life who may be experiencing scams, fraud, financial exploitation, or another form of abuse, these are some of the things that we can do for them. We can listen to their experience as they characterize it. We can hear from them about what they have concerns about. We can give guidance and advice. We can connect them with other professionals. So these are just a range of things that we can do to help form that action plan in response to concerns about financial safety. And when we think about financial exploitation and fraud, we really think of this as a form of elder abuse. And elder abuse in general is defined here. We think of it as intentional, knowing or negligent acts by a caregiver or any person that either causes harm to an older adult or that creates a risk of harm to an older adult. And in our cultural definition here, we can think of that as financial harm too, not at all insignificant and producing a lot of really negative outcomes for older adults. Types of abuse can range, and the reason I'm talking about a range of types of abuse is because I'm going to talk a little bit about financial exploitation and something called polyvictimization. I'll talk about that in a minute, but what we know is that often people are experiencing more than one form of harm at a time. And some of the forms of harm that older adults might experience are included here. We think about physical or emotional abuse. That could be physical violence or threats, sexual abuse, financial exploitation, spiritual abuse, that's ridiculing another person, really putting them down for their spiritual beliefs or practices. These are all ways that people who are perpetrating harm and abuse can undermine the confidence and security of another individual and to take further advantage of them. So these are some of the forms of harm that we're concerned about and some of the forms of harm that we hear about on our helpline at the Minnesota Elder Justice Center. And polyvictimization affects a lot of the folks who call us. They may call with an initial concern about financial exploitation, financial harm, or loss of money. But in a conversation with an advocate on the phone line, they reveal that at the same time, they're being threatened by the person who's taking that money from them. Maybe they're being threatened with harm. We've heard folks who have shared with us that there have been threats to their life, threats to their safety, or threats to the lives and safety of their pets or family members, things and people that they care a great deal about, belongings that they are concerned with caring for, concerned with supporting, in the case of pets. So these are very serious threats that can very seriously impact the people who experience them. So that's just one example of a form of polyvictimization in which financial exploitation is accompanied by another more serious form of harm. And this is concerning for us too, because we want to make sure that people are getting the range of relief that's necessary when they're experiencing harm. If people need financial support, we want to make sure that we're connecting them with resources that will allow that. But if they're experiencing physical harm, we want to make sure that we get them into a safe setting where they can live securely without having to be fearful about their safety. Specifically, I want to talk a little bit more about financial exploitation and the way that interconnects with some of these other issues that we face in the elder justice arena. And in general, we've been talking a bit about financial exploitation. Sometimes we think about this as a broad term that incorporates various forms of financial harm. Some state statutes define financial exploitation in those ways and will allow financial exploitation to take on a kind of broad sense of financial harm or crime, theft, fraud. But we'll talk today specifically about financial exploitation that happens when there's a relationship of trust between the victim and the perpetrator. I've talked a little bit about that dynamic as a part of our understanding of the definition of abuse. In particular, we recognize that when these forms of harm happen, they do happen within these trust relationships sometimes. And so this is something in particular that we're thinking about. And then I just want to point out at the bottom of this list, you'll see one form of financial exploitation that we think quite a bit about at the Minnesota Elder Justice Center is when somebody has a legal authority to provide support to another person, and yet they're abusing that legal authority to provide support. So they're doing something illegal or inappropriate with a legal authority that they have. That's called a breach of a fiduciary duty. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that and why that impacts us in our communities and why we receive so much inquiry about those issues on our helpline at the Elder Justice Center. But that's, for example, when somebody is serving as a power of attorney for another individual and they're acting inappropriately based on those permissions. So that's a form of financial exploitation that we hear quite a bit about. Well, we certainly know people do generally form those kinds of supportive relationships with individuals with whom they may have trust relationships. So when we see those forms of fraud, that's not at all an inconsiderable betrayal for people, but they might also be relying on a legal authority to access resources or information about the victim. So something to be aware of in the kind of universe of examples of financial exploitation. And these are just some examples from our helpline. These are instances in which we've seen financial exploitation taking place for people. You can see the example that I referenced there, which is using a power of attorney permission to inappropriately access somebody's resources, maybe inappropriately using what could be understood or referred to as joint bank accounts or joint resources, taking cash, actually going so far as to borrow against homes. We've seen mortgages taken out, making deed or titling changes to ownership records. Sometimes even living rent-free could be considered a form of financial exploitation. Certainly not all the time, but sometimes, depending on what's going on and what the circumstances are, and whether or not that person is welcome. We get a great number of calls on the helpline from folks who are experiencing victimization at the hands of a person who lives in their home. And so that's something that we're often considering, is what are the living circumstances? And then scams and frauds of many kinds can emerge here in the universe of financial exploitation or financial harm that a person may be experiencing. And so when we think about, in particular, financial crime in older adults, one of the ways that we make distinctions for folks about approaches in our helpline context is to make that distinction. Marty, I think you pointed it out earlier, that we think about kind of financial exploitation as largely defined within state law and generally happening in that trusted person context when a person is really being exploited by an individual with whom they have a relationship. And then stranger scams and frauds, really, again, the focus of Marty's research and discussion when these crimes are perpetrated broadly and across against wide groups of people, and generally are involving significant criminal operations that are perpetrating them. When we think about financial exploitation in the trusted person context, some of the warning signs that we might be looking for have to do with the way that a person is relating with the individuals around them. And so sometimes when we receive helpline calls from family members, they've become aware that an individual is a particular provocation for somebody they care about. There's a particular agitation or stress that happens when they might be visited by or in contact with an individual. So this is something to be aware of. And sometimes when we're providing care and companionship to a person, we might be in a particularly good position to recognize when a person is agitated or uncomfortable. That's just something that I might call out. I was thinking about warning signs and how we talk about warning signs. And you know, sometimes those red flags and warning signs, they feel like they should be so kind of bold and obvious to us. But especially when we're thinking about, in this context, when people are in long relationships of trust with individuals who may also be causing them harm, sometimes those signs of discomfort or agitation or worry are much subtler. And those of us who are in long-standing relationships with the folks we're caring for or supporting are in a unique position to notice when that happens. So something to be aware of with regard to those relationships. I'm having the unique experience of kind of sideways reading the slides, so I'm going to come down with this lavalier microphone and stand a little bit roam around a little bit in the room. I just want to make sure that I'm pointing out the things that I really want to emphasize here today. So someone pressured to sign a document. We talked about pressure, the pressure of time, the urgency that scammers use to indicate that you have to do something to take advantage of gaps in perception of financial decisional capability versus actual financial decisional capability. And that same pressure is active in instances of financial exploitation as well. So if somebody is pressing urgent changes to documents, these could be estate planning documents, they could be what we sometimes refer to as incapacity planning documents, or the kinds of tools that we might create like healthcare directives or financial powers of attorney. But any pressureful changes to those documents, that's certainly also something to be aware of or note, especially if it's not clear what the urgency for that pressure is. beyond the timeline of the person who's pressuring. So that's just an observation that I would make about some of these warning signs of financial exploitation. Again, for those of us who are caring for individuals in our lives, we are in a unique position to be aware of whether or not someone is experiencing those forms of urgency or pressure. So we have a special spot to kind of watch for these particular warning signs. I do want to talk a little bit about some myths related to financial exploitation. Certainly the idea that wealth can inoculate against financial exploitation is a myth, and Marty spoke really directly about that. We know that wealth actually can be an explanation for the focus of scammers and fraudsters on a particular segment of our population. So we know that that's not a protection against financial exploitation, but also neither is poverty. And losses when you are in need of resources can be very significant. Poverty does not protect us against experiences of financial exploitation within family contexts. And finally, Marty spoke about this as well, but we know that capacity impairment is not required for a person to fall victim to scams, frauds, or financial exploitation. We know many victims of fraud are experiencing or engaged in financial decision making at a huge range of levels. So in any case, we know that none of these are necessarily protections against financial exploitation. I want to call out a few of our important Minnesota partners with regard to responding to financial exploitation, because we do have a lot of folks who are working on this in Minnesota. Now, I put telephone contact information here on the slide for folks who are taking notes during the presentation, but you can reach out to me and I can share other contact information with you as well for any of these resources that can respond in instances of financial exploitation concerns or desire to gather more information about reporting experiences of financial harm. So you'll see on our list our Adult Protective Services contact information through the Minnesota Adult Abuse Reporting Center, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. I have the Minnesota Department of Commerce who's here today, the Office of the Minnesota Attorney General also here, so a lot of these resources you can gather here today on the break. You can pick them up and you can take them away with you so that you'll always have contact information for some of these important Minnesota partners. Any one of these partners can help you find additional information about how to proceed in report making if you so desire, or receipt of other information or advocacy if you're concerned about scams and frauds on behalf of yourself or others. And then if you suspect abuse, neglect, or exploitation and you want to make a report to Adult Protection, this is the way that you contact Adult Protection in Minnesota. It's via the Minnesota Adult Abuse Reporting Center. So in the past, it used to be necessary to contact individual counties, but now we have one toll-free number that allows us to make a report to Adult Protection in Minnesota. And that's this number here on the screen. When you contact the Minnesota Adult Abuse Reporting Center, the folks at the call center there will notify county services in the county where the victim resides. And if you're not sure that you are ready to make a report, but you're looking for additional information about how systems respond to reports of abuse, neglect, and financial exploitation, you can call the Minnesota Elder Justice Center or other advocacy organizations who can kind of explain the process of reporting. Here's what happens if you call Adult Protective Services for a report or intervention. Here's what happens if you go directly to law enforcement for a report or intervention. These are the responses you might expect, and this is the information that you might need to gather together to have with you to be prepared to make that report. So we can help identify those resources or tools that might be helpful in that process. And we have lots of national partners. Many are also here today, or resources from our national partners are here today. I know I brought resources from the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. I have resources from the CFPB that I really like. Most of them have been gathered up by attendees, which is very good, but all of them are available for free from the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. And the series that I really like from them is called Managing Someone Else's Money. It's a really useful series that has tools for fiduciaries who are serving in a wide variety of purposes or roles: trustees, court-appointed guardians or conservators, attorneys in fact under power of attorney tools. Federal Trade Commission receives and offers wonderful resources. Marti shared many of these as well. The Internet Crime Complaints Center, we talked about how critical it is to make a report there quickly in the event of a scam, suspicion of scam or fraud. And then more resources are available from the IRS as well as Social Security and VA. So we know we've got a lot of agency partners here that have resources about responding to financial harm and achieving more financial safety or stability. I want to shift gears a little bit from resources now to talking about financial decision-making for another person. We spend a tremendous amount of time talking about this issue on our helpline. And so the issue of financial decision-making for another person comes up in a variety of ways. Sometimes people simply have questions about how to go about doing that. We often tell people it's very important to plan, it's important to have somebody who can make a decision for you if you're not available. But then we sort of stop there. We don't really tell people how to identify who that person might be or how that person should do the job that they have been asked to do. So we want to step into that gap and give a little bit of information about what those tools are and what a person can and can't do when serving in that role. If you ever find yourself with questions about that, you can call us at the Elder Justice Center and we'll talk to you about what the rules are related to serving as a fiduciary for somebody else. At least we'll tell you about the rules in Minnesota. So financial decision-making for another person involves service as a fiduciary. And I think a basic definition of a fiduciary for all of us is useful here because there's some shorthand that I'm going to use in reference to fiduciary or financial decision-making for another person, fiduciary service. So a fiduciary is a person who manages somebody else's resources, period. Very simple. It's a very simple role, and many of us find ourselves in it. We're managing resources for another person. A fiduciary can be formally appointed using a form, like a power of attorney form, or a fiduciary can be informal. I can say to my sister, I'll take care of that. I'll take care of the decisions related to that account for you, or I'll take care of that financial transaction for you. And if I create that reliance and she relies on me, I become a fiduciary for her. I have some duties to her when I make a commitment to manage something. So I can be an informal fiduciary based on a verbal agreement and no particular form, or I can be a formal fiduciary, a trustee under a trust, an attorney in fact using a power of attorney. I can be a family member. I can be serving as a friend or neighbor. I can be a paid professional and be a fiduciary. I can charge for my fees as a fiduciary. So there are a whole range of ways that a person can step into the role of managing somebody else's financial resources. I just want you to be aware of that because many of you, might be serving as a fiduciary for somebody else. Has anybody ever served as a personal representative or executor under a will? How about an attorney in fact under a power of attorney document? POAs in the house. How about a trustee? Anybody ever been a trustee for another person? Yeah, hands up. Everybody, all those are fiduciary roles. So each of those individuals has been a fiduciary for that period of time that they were in that role. And a fiduciary in their role has 4 basic common law duties. These are the things that a person serving as a manager for somebody else's resources needs to do, no matter what. No matter whether the person whose resources you're managing says they want you to do them or not. You still have to as part of the law. So when we're serving as a fiduciary, we have to act in the best interest of the person we're helping. Not if I'm helping my sister, I'm acting in her best interest. I'm not acting in my best interest. So that's the contrast there. And that's a really critical issue, particularly when we think about financial exploitation, because some people will refer to fiduciary tools like power of attorney as a license to steal. And that always makes me a little bit frustrated because it's absolutely not a license to steal. The primary and most critical and most significant ongoing duty associated with serving as a fiduciary for another person is that you act in their best interest. And you have immediately breached your fiduciary duty and broken the law if you do not do that. So if somebody is able to make a cogent argument to me about how stealing from somebody is in their best interest, then I would love to hear it. I welcome that at any time. But generally, stealing from somebody or using their resources without their permission or in a way that they would not have authorized themselves is not in their best interest. So here we have a fiduciary breach right off the bat and a violation of the law. This is significant for us. If we want to stop somebody from causing financial harm, or if we want to stop somebody from engaging in poly-victimization, causing financial harm and other forms of potential harm, we have access here because of this fiduciary duty to act in the best interest of another person. Here's where we can say, you have stepped across a line. In any case, best interest is just one of the 4 duties that a fiduciary owes to the person that they're helping. Acting in their best interest is the first one. Managing their resources carefully is the second one. So not making wild or outlandish or risky investments with somebody's money that's not my own. That's really what we're talking about there. It's also important to keep that person's resources separate from my own. So if I am managing somebody else's resources, I'm not putting those into my own bank accounts. That's called commingling assets, and we must avoid it if we're serving as a helper for somebody else in this context. And then finally, we have to keep good records, and this is an important piece of this puzzle. It's not onerous record keeping, it's just consistent record keeping. And so for those of us in this room, many of whom will recognize the process of maintaining a checkbook ledger, that's what we're talking about. It's not overwhelming, but it's just a matter of keeping a record of what I've done on behalf of somebody else. And the other important piece of that to remember is that I need to do that if I'm a fiduciary, whether or not the person I'm helping wants me to. I have to keep records of what I've done because somebody other than the person I'm helping might actually demand those records, like a court. A court might say, hey, you've been managing somebody's money that doesn't belong to you. We want to know what you've been doing. And you'll have an obligation to produce those materials. So I want to share those roles because those responsibilities as a fiduciary, they're fairly straightforward, they're not particularly difficult, but very few people are told about those responsibilities when they step into a financial decision-making role. And yet if we do these things, we can really offer clarity to the folks that we're helping and to any other people who might have questions about what we're doing on behalf of somebody else's finances. So something to consider if we are being asked to step into a financial decision-making role. Again, many of us in this room already have, and some folks are actively serving in those ways right now. Having a good sense of fiduciary duties can actually help us spot financial exploitation or be aware of financial malfeasance when it happens. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. These are some types of fiduciaries. So I talked a little bit about folks. I asked if folks had served as executors or personal representatives under wills, trustees, rep payees, and VA fiduciaries. So for folks who are receiving Social Security benefits on behalf of another person or receiving veterans benefits on behalf of another person, these are also fiduciary roles. And then finally, the last example I have on the list here is a conservator. That's a person who's appointed by a court to manage the resources of another person. And that is a fiduciary role as well. There are also fiduciary roles that I don't have on this list, so this is not exhaustive, but these are the ones that often come up for us in our work at the Elder Justice Center. Another issue here is that there's a gap here, and this is actually to Marty's excellent point earlier, which is this sort of complexity here that is a way that folks take advantage of others within this context. There's a tremendous amount of complexity with regard to decision-making on behalf of other people. Unfortunately, we have kind of developed a system that uses a huge range of tools to put one person in a sort of role of responsibility for making decisions for another. We have a whole range of financial and fiduciary tools, and then we have a whole other set of tools that enable individuals to make things like health decisions for other people. The authority that is accompanied by these various legal tools authorizing one person to make a decision for another, the details of these tools differ, and the circumstances in which that decisional authority vests in the second person differ from circumstance to circumstance. So for this reason, Whether or not I have the power to assert a decision on somebody else's behalf is not always clear to family members, which can result in a lot of confusion and sometimes a great deal of frustration when one person believes that they should have the ability or authority to make a decision and another person in the family believes that they should or that the first person should not for some reason. So clarification around who gets to make what decision when can be a really helpful tool for families that are struggling with frustration or confusion about whether or not a person can step into a decisional role. And so if you are in a situation where you know somebody who is in that position or struggling with understanding what legal tools confer what form of decisional authority, you can send them to the Elder Justice Center and we can help answer that question. So we can say, this is what an attorney in fact under a financial statutory power of attorney can decide about. This is what the healthcare agent can decide about. This is what the trustee can decide about. We'll talk a little bit more about that with a person who has those questions. Because people often believe that they have more or less authority than they do. And the conflict that it creates for people to have that misunderstanding can be significant within the family context. I'm often faced with questions on the helpline as well about how to choose the decision maker. And that's a very individual inquiry, and it's one that we're always happy to help explore with people if they have questions about how to identify the appropriate kinds of capabilities that a person who's assisting with certain kinds of decisions may need. We're glad to talk through that with folks. But in general, I'm thinking about, does somebody have values that I share? Will they respect the values that I hold if I'm inviting them to make decisions about things that are important to me? Are they organized and trustworthy? Do I have a trustful relationship with them? Belief that they'll carry out the things that I hope they will, or instruct them to? And then are they going to communicate with me and the other people who care about me in a way that is clear and understandable? That's another important piece of that question. So these are some of the prompts that we use when we're talking with folks about how to think about choosing a financial decision maker. Anecdotally, I'll say, and I'm sure that you have heard something similar in your own life, that I have certainly heard from a lot of folks who feel that there's a sort of a hierarchy within their own family context. My example is working with a family who was making some planning decisions, thinking, my oldest son will be frustrated, embarrassed, or disappointed if we don't choose him to be our financial decision maker. But my older daughter is better equipped to provide us assistance in that area. And folks feeling really torn and appointing somebody that they don't think would be the best decision maker because they're worried about how that person might feel or how that might affect their family dynamic. But unfortunately, the fallout from that can be also not insignificant. So those are all considerations that we would want to make, and something that we can help as friends and family members, we can help people do if they are feeling particularly challenged by that issue, is to help kind of creatively strategize about why a person might justify making the decisions that they know are safest and best. So if a person knows they want support from their daughter versus their son, we can say, perhaps your daughter is closer, has more time. What are the things that we can use to help within that family context to help that person explain why they made their decision so that ultimately they're able to go with a safer choice? So those are just some of the things that we're thinking about when we're talking about choosing decision makers here and helping the folks that we care about make the right kinds of choices. And along with types of fiduciaries, there are also different types of financial directives. So when we're thinking through how we are, whether we're appointing somebody into a role as an attorney in fact, under a power of attorney, or in some other role, these are the roles that we might be considering here. And these are specifically financial directives. So when we're thinking about trustworthiness and organization, these might be some of the tools that we'd be considering making. And these things include things like trusts for folks who are concerned both about how to manage their resources during their lifetime, but also want to use that same tool to give some instruction, some testamentary instruction, so to give some instruction about what to do with resources after they die. Power of attorney, that's a lifetime tool to make somebody available to assert financial decisions in the event that I'm not available to make my own. and then other specific assignments of authority, like how to manage specifically Social Security resources or specifically veterans benefits. Those are some of the other types of financial directives a person might have. The most common one that people create by far is a power of attorney tool. This is something that we answer most of our questions about related to legal financial tools at the helpline. And it's a document that's recommended pretty widely for people to use to appoint somebody to make decisions in financial matters if they're not able to. I just mostly want to point out here that we often the terminology here is complicated and can be confusing. I'm happy to answer any questions about it that you might have, but we often refer to both the document and the role as a power of attorney. I'm a power of attorney for. And that's clear, and generally people understand that, but within the document it can be confusing when people confront it for the first time, because the role is called principal person, that's the individual who gives the permission, and then the person serving as the helper is called an attorney in fact, and that's how they're identified in the statutory form that's most commonly completed. So these are the roles in the document, and the attorney in fact is the individual who is being appointed to make decisions on behalf of the principal person. I just want to point out that within the power of attorney document, the one that we most commonly see is a statutory form tool in Minnesota. There are some really valuable opportunities for oversight and control, and I just want to point those out because I know that a lot of folks are, again, dealing with these documents or tools on a relatively regular basis. But there's an opportunity to offer some oversight or limitation within the gifting clause of the power of attorney document. And the gifting clause is a portion of a power of attorney form that allows the attorney, in fact, to give themselves gifts with the principal person's money. It's in our statutory form, and it allows, in many instances, spouses to serve as attorneys in fact for one another. And that allows them to access and move resources around. So the general explanation for why the gifting clause exists, that's one of them. Because a lot of people say, why would you even want to allow that, or why would that be a part of the tool? But we can limit gifting within the power of attorney document. So that's a consideration that a person creating a tool can make. There's also opportunities for thinking about who receives those accountings that any fiduciary is obliged to maintain. So a record of what they're doing. And there can be a third party identified to receive those or that information from the person serving as the attorney in fact. So those are a couple of ways. There are fiduciary duties that we can rely upon, which we learn a little bit more about and which we can be more confident in asserting. And then there's also revocation and expiration, which apply to powers of attorney that are created in particular ways. And so I'll share a little bit more about that as well. A power of attorney document does expire when a person dies. So a power of attorney document is not an estate planning tool. It is not a will. And it will not allow a person to access bank accounts or other accounts or resources after the principal person dies. So the way that a power of attorney tool is used is for lifetime decision making. It also expires if it's given an expiration date. Some people are making transaction-specific powers of attorney, and so they only want the power of attorney permission to last for the duration of a specific financial transaction. But some are making ongoing powers of attorney for financial decision-making in the event that they lose capacity. And so, in that case, we wouldn't probably put an expiration date. And also, if there's a dissolution or a divorce and spouses are named as powers of attorney, that will cause that agreement to expire as well. So if a person is in that situation and they want that relationship, a person has to recreate the power of attorney following a dissolution or a divorce. They also may be revoked. And this is significant for us when we think about financial exploitation, because if a person who is serving as an attorney in fact is behaving inappropriately or illegally or financially exploiting the principal individual, then that is not a safe fiduciary relationship, and it's appropriate to revoke the power of attorney document. However, in order to do so, the principal person has to have the capacity to revoke the power of attorney document. So that becomes a challenge under certain circumstances. Not all, because again, the capacity to understand that revocation doesn't set an extraordinarily high bar for complexity. It's simply that somebody has been making financial decisions and they're no longer, that's no longer a desirable person to make financial decisions, that instruction, demonstrating that. And then the notice component of that, notifying persons who have previously had authority to make financial transactions that they no longer have that authority. So those are some of the pieces of revocation. POA revocation needs to be notarized, as does a power of attorney document itself. So we're talking about making sure that the signature is happening in front of a notary under those circumstances. Representative payees and VA fiduciaries are managing financial decisions in very specific areas or realms. And so folks who are rep payees, they are managing somebody else's Social Security benefits, and folks who are VA fiduciaries are managing someone's veterans benefits. And mostly I want to emphasize that in these roles, the agencies that are receiving reports are the agencies that are providing those funds. So Social Security receives reports from folks who are serving as representative payees, and the Veterans Administration receives reports from folks who are serving as VA fiduciaries. And folks who are serving in those roles should have clear communication from those agencies about how that report making is done. So if anybody has served in those roles, you'll know that the Social Security Administration indicates when they want to receive information from you in your role as a rep payee, for example. And the thing is that I think can be confusing in family contexts here or community contexts here of support is that in these instances, again, only decisions related to those funds are put into the hands of the fiduciary. So only decisions related to veterans benefits, only decisions related to Social Security benefits in the instance of VA fiduciaries and rep payees. That means bank accounts or other assets outside of those sources of funds are not part of the purview of the rep payee or the VA fiduciary. So some limitations there. And then important reporting requirements as well. And let me just see my clicker. Oh, okay, it's working now. Somebody give me a wave if the slides begin to rapidly advance because I clicked the clicker like 10 times just now. Okay. Another fiduciary relationship that might be very familiar to folks is a trustee relationship between a person who has created a trust and somebody who is appointed as a trustee to manage the resources that fund the trust. This is another fiduciary relationship. And with regard to trustees, there's a similar limitation here. The most important thing I think for us to recognize about the role of a trustee is that the trust document itself gives almost all of the information that we need to know about the roles and responsibilities of the trustee. So it's more rare that you'll be able to call for general information about what a trustee's roles and responsibilities are without a person actually looking at or reviewing a trust document. And usually the person who's able to answer questions about or review a trust document and talk about the responsibilities of a trustee is an attorney. So generally, if you are talking about a trust, you are talking about questions to an attorney who can review and interpret that legal tool. A trustee can serve alone, individually, or can serve as a co-trustee with other persons. A trustee can be a professional, can be succeeded by another trustee. So there are complex structures that can be created where folks can serve collaboratively. And then, importantly, same issue. Oh, there, okay. Importantly, I keep clicking, I see what I'm doing. I'm clicking the laser pointer. I hope I'm not shining the laser pointer directly into your eyes, Lisa. Okay. A trustee, like a rep payee or VA fiduciary, only has the ability to assert authority over things that are in a trust. So we're looking at what a person has done in terms of their trust planning to understand where the authority of the trustee may lie. All the fiduciary duties apply here. Again, we've got a fiduciary role. And the most important thing I think to understand with trusts is that trust document itself, and sometimes they can be quite thick, contains a lot of important information about what roles, responsibilities, and oversight opportunities are available within a particular relationship. So, something important, I think, to just note about both opportunities and limitations with trusts, but because they are fairly common, we do know that folks have questions about them. Regardless, all advanced directives that we might consider in a kind of action plan here, we need to take a handful of considerations to make sure they're coordinated. So again, wanting to understand kind of the distinctions between when a power of attorney can act versus when somebody making other forms of decisions can act. If we have multiple decision makers in different roles, are they people who can get along or communicate together? Because sometimes we have roles about receiving certain kinds of health services that might involve also decisions around certain kinds of financial matters. Where a person receives care, what type of care a person receives, and if there are multiple people who are involved in those conversations, if we're making our action plan, are we thinking through whether or not those individuals will be able to communicate effectively together? It's that effective communication piece there. We might change our attitudes over time, or another person's circumstances might change over time. The person we've selected to serve as our decision maker might move, they might have their own kind of impactful event in their lives that impacts whether they'll be able to serve us in the way that we hoped. And so we might need to make changes, but just making sure that we are kind of connected with that, remembering that we have these tools in place and that we're changing them over time or responding to changes in circumstances. That's an important piece of this puzzle. And that we're coordinating across our planning. And so it's a valuable resources. Some of these that our partners have here today that talk about planning broadly and think about coordinating those resources. Do the people that I have asked to help make decisions about my estate after I die, do they have the information and relationships that they need with the people who are making decisions during my lifetime? Does that information flow make sense? So these are all opportunities for us to take a look at that. And when we don't have advanced directives in place, and we are no longer able to assert a decision, then sometimes we are looking at a court-supervised arrangement like guardianship or conservatorship. And I just want to mention this because, again, the structures of guardianship and conservatorship are a source for a large number of calls that come into our helpline. People are often told they need a guardian, or they're told that they need to become a guardian for another person or a conservator for another person. It may even be a natural instinct that we have to look into these kinds of arrangements in which we're making decisions for another person. But guardianship and conservatorship are different kinds of decisional arrangements than any of those others that I've talked about before. So anybody can create a plan that involves a power of attorney tool or an estate plan if they are so interested, using a wide range of tools such as hiring an attorney or using a range of other types of informational tools that are available these days. If we haven't done that, though, and lose our ability to make a decision, then it takes a legal process to identify who is the appropriate person to assert a decision on our behalf. And that legal process is articulated in guardianship and conservatorship. If a person needs assistance making decisions about their life circumstances or their health, then they may be appointed a guardian. And if they need assistance making decisions about their financial circumstances or the things that they own, then they may be appointed a conservator. But these are much more significant roles for a variety of reasons than those roles that I've talked about before. First of all, there are usually fees associated with the court process that's necessary in order to establish guardianship and conservatorship. So they're more costly processes. There are both filing fees and then there are attorney fees related to petitioning for guardianship or conservatorship. So it's a more expensive process than doing a kind of pre-planning action plan. And then the most common forms of guardianship and conservatorship that are implemented today are what we would describe as plenary guardianships or plenary conservatorships, which means that the guardian or conservator who's stepping in to make decisions is given the broadest and most comprehensive range of decisional powers available under the law. which means that a guardianship or conservatorship is a very significant imposition on somebody's civil rights and autonomy. You're taking their ability to make their own decisions away from them and giving them the right to make those decisions to another person. These include things like voting. So who else, I mean, there are sort of certain other populations, right, in the US where people's voting rights are taken away from them. I mean, think about the imposition that is. So guardianship, conservatorship, significant imposition on a person's civil rights, much more significant undertaking. My great encouragement in response to that truth is that folks take advantage of their opportunity to plan ahead rather than failing to do so and leaving it up to courts to decide who will make decisions on your behalf. So we can decide for ourselves, or a court can decide for us, and if a court decides for us, it can be a significant undertaking. In order for a court to impose a guardianship or conservatorship, there has to be evidence presented in court that shows that the principal person, the person who is going to potentially be subject to these arrangements, is not able to make their own decisions. You can imagine how those court hearings feel for the person who is needing assistance with decision making. So, and in addition to that evidence needing to be demonstrated, in addition to that, there must be no less restrictive alternative, such as a statutory power of attorney form, for example, that could work in this instance. So for the most part, when folks call the Minnesota Elder Justice Center, having been told that they need to initiate a guardianship or conservatorship, our first question to them is, what else have you tried? Because the law requires that you try other things first, and not only that, but the law now requires that courts make specific findings about why those other tools did not work. So the result of a court hearing, if a guardianship or conservatorship is imposed in these cases, must contain information that shows why a power of attorney won't work or why a healthcare directive won't work to assist the person in decision making. That's how significant the imposition is on a person's civil rights when guardianship or conservatorship are considered and when they're plenary. So that's why we take these extra precautions and why it can be so valuable, again, to look at these other action plan tools that are available to us, such as power of attorney, healthcare directive, the creation of a trust if that's something that is of interest to us, and et cetera. Finally, the court has oversight over guardianships or conservatorships. And I can explain more about that in individual conversations if folks have questions about that. But the reason for that, again, is because of the kind of comprehensive permission that a guardianship or conservatorship has and the power and control that happens within the context of guardianship and conservatorship relationships with folks who are subject to those structures. I want to talk briefly about reporting. I did talk about the Minnesota Adult Abuse Reporting Center once before, but I just want to put up the contact information here again as a reminder. If a person wants to make a report to Adult Protective Services in Minnesota, this is the way to do it. And you can make that report, again, using the toll-free contact line, but there's also a website if you'd like to use a web portal. I don't find the web portal to be quite as easy to navigate as some tools, and so generally I recommend the telephonic tool, but if you're interested in looking at the web portal, I can give you a web address as well, or you can certainly Google Minnesota Adult Abuse Reporting Center, and you will find the Minnesota Department of Human Services common entry point for making adult protection reports. I also want to put our contact information up on the screen one more time. And now I will wrap up by just saying again that I am tremendously grateful to everybody for being here, for your attention and for the energy that you are directing towards learning about these resources and these issues. It's incredibly helpful because the most important people we have sharing messages about financial safety and security are peers, individuals who know us, who know what our values are, and who know about the way we make decisions. So being out in the community to share this information with your peers is so tremendously helpful to us in our work, and I want to thank you for that. Thank Better Business Bureau and AARP for inviting us to be here today, and I look forward to talking with folks throughout the rest of the morning and hearing more about what we can do in response to scams and frauds. Thank you very, very much.
So I'm Jay Hoppola. I work for AARP here in Minnesota. We run a number of programs. We are a membership association. We're representing people over the age of 50. We're definitely gearing up for the legislative session that starts in a few short weeks, and we'll be working on issues at the state legislature that affect your finances, that affect your health care, and many more issues that are important to people over the age of 50. We know that financial crime and financial security and all of these scams are very important to you. You're interested in these kind of issues, so are we. And that's why we run the Fraud Watch Network program, so folks can go online, aarp.org/fraudwatchnetwork, and we run a call center nationally. So, in fact, every week we get hundreds of phone calls from people all across the country. They're reporting to us the type of scams that they're seeing. Oftentimes they need help sorting through the information they're receiving, and we provide that, help them figure out if it is a scam, where to report those scams, and also when people have lost money, they can call us, and we have volunteers who help them figure out how to proceed, make sure they don't lose any more money, and get some help. So that's our Fraud Watch Network program. Here in Minnesota, we put on events like this, and I work with a great group of volunteers that I'll bet you met on your way in today. We call them our fraud fighters. And you could be a fraud fighter too. We're always looking for more volunteers to join us. We have monthly meetings. And our goal is to take this kind of information that we learn. We go back to our dinner tables and our backyards, and we talk with our neighbors and our friends and our families about these issues, make sure that we're all better protected. So it's time to get on with our last speaker and our featured speaker of the day. His name's Brett Johnson. You'll meet him very shortly here. He has a very unique perspective on these financial crime issues, as you will hear. He's a cybersecurity consultant and works globally. He's traveled to Hawaii recently in the Middle East to attend some conferences and speak, and now he has the pleasure of joining us here in snowy Minnesota. So come on up, Brent. Let's welcome Brett to the stage. Thank you.
Jay, I appreciate it. Thank you again. So how is everyone this morning? My wife, I brought my wife with me. She's over at the mall doing some Christmas shopping. She is not used to snow. So I'm like, yeah, it's snow. She's like, I know it's snow. But I want to thank you guys for bringing me in today. I appreciate it. I truly do. I'm going to give some of my background. Then we're going to talk about cybercrime, cybersecurity, how these attacks happen, who the attackers are, how you can protect yourself from the type of person that I used to be. I'll have some room for some questions. We'll open that up as well. So I like to stick around. If anyone has any questions or wants to talk about anything, I try to make sure that I stick around so we can do that, all right? So with that being said, let's go ahead and get started. That is my United States Most Wanted picture. Yeah, I was in Las Vegas, Nevada. The night before, I'd stolen $160,000 out of ATMs, woke up the next morning, signed on to cartersmarket.com. There's my name, U.S. Most Wanted beside of it. There are things in life known as aha moments. This was more of an ah type moment. So I did what any normal person would do. I loaded up and I went to Disney World. Yeah, I really went to Disney World. Lasted about 6 weeks. The Secret Service, they came and got me. They arrested me. They sent me to prison. Then I escaped from prison. Well, I mean, I prefer not to think of it as escape. I think of it as the institution could no longer benefit me, so I decided to release myself on my own recognizance. That got me even more time. So I guess the question is, well, who is this numbnuts up here talking today? The answer is, the United States Secret Service called me the original internet godfather. Yeah. Now, what does it take to get that title? 39 felonies, because 38 just isn't enough. Placed on the United States Most Wanted list, I escaped from prison, and if that weren't enough, I built and ran the first organized cybercrime community. It's called Shadow Crew. It was a precursor of today's darknet, and darknet markets laid the foundation for the way modern cybercrime channels operate today. Those 39 felonies had to do with refining modern financial cybercrime as we now know it. Account takeovers, credit card theft, phishing schemes, stimulus fraud, tax return, identity theft, you name it, I'm that guy. Now, of course, that lands one in prison, deservedly so, and usually that's where the story ends. But I've been very fortunate. very fortunate. Through the help of my sister, my wife, and then finally the FBI, I was given the opportunity to turn my life around, and I took it. Today, I'll get to that in a second. Today, I'm this guy. I'll go back to Shadow Crew in just a second. Today, I'm the first chief criminal officer on the planet. I'm an ambassador for AARP. I travel across the world to help protect businesses and consumers from that type of person that I used to be. And I want you guys to know, as I'm going on through this presentation, there's an entire story on my background that we don't have time enough to go into today. But I want you guys to know that the reason I'm able to do this, what separates me from where I am now and being back in prison for 20 years, is people like you taking the time and giving me the opportunity to speak. I want you to know I appreciate that. So if you've got any questions, anything to talk about, I'm more than happy to stick around and answer every single thing that you've got or want to talk about, okay? I want to go back to Shadow Crew for just a second. I come from Eastern Kentucky, so cybercrime was not my start of crime, all right? It was not. My criminal career began much earlier, when I was 10 years old. That's when my life of crime begins. I'm from Eastern Kentucky. Eastern Kentucky is one of these areas like the Panhandle of Florida, parts of Louisiana, that if you're not fortunate enough to have a job, you may be involved in some sort of scam, hustle, fraud, whatever you want to call it. My mother was basically the captain of the entire fraud industry. And I mean no crime too big or too small. This is a woman who at one point, she steals a 108,000-pound Caterpillar D9 bulldozer. Another point, she takes a slip and fall in a convenience store, tries to sue the owner. That's mommy. We had a neighbor she acted as a pimp for. That's my mom. My dad was and my dad is a good man. He just forgot about it for a time. He was so scared of my mom leaving that he became the enabler. If she wanted to commit a crime, he would co-sign on to it. If she wanted to abuse someone, he wouldn't step in the way. And she was an abusive parent. I'm not talking about just physical. She could be physical. I'm talking about mental, emotional, verbal negligence across the board. My mom used to bring men home in front of my dad. My dad would sit there and cry, and beg her not to do it, and she would do it anyway. Finally, she leaves my father. I was 10, my sister Denise was 9. We were in Panama City, Florida. We moved from Panama City back to Hazard, Kentucky, and my mom kept up those partying ways. Sometimes she'd take me and my sister with her. She'd leave us in the car. She went and partied. Sometimes we'd wait in the living room as she'd adjourn to the bedroom. Most of the time, she just left us at home. And I'm the kid that gets the worst parts from my mom and my dad. From my mom, of course, I get that criminal mindset. From my father, I get that fear of being abandoned, of the people that I love leaving. So I'm the kid, mom had been gone for a few days. I'm the kid that post up at the window, looking outside, see if mom was coming home. Sometimes I'd walk out into the driveway, see if she's driving down the street. Denise, my sister, 9 years old. She wasn't like that. She was just the kid who was angry. So mom had been gone for a few days. We didn't have any food in the house. Denise walks in one day. She's got this pack of pork chops in her hand. And I'm like, where'd you get that? And she's like, I stole it. And I'm like, show me how you did that. So she takes me over, shows me how she steals food. And I'm like, best idea ever. Let's do that. So we start stealing food. Look across the way. Kmart's across the way. Kmart's got more than food. So it becomes this perverted form of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Books, games, jewelry, music, toys. Yes, until mom comes home, sees all the stolen loot, asks where it came from. Now, when you're 10 years old, you can't lie very well. I stood up. We found it. She's like, no, you didn't find that. My sister Denise, she never lies at all. Denise stands up. She's half proud. She's half pissed off. We stole it. My mom looks at my sister, show me how you did that. And she joins us. Not only does she join us, but she goes to get her mother to join us as well. We become this intergenerational shoplifting ring in Eastern Kentucky. Used to take these road trips. They'd go to JCPenney's and steal clothes and jewelry. I go to the bookstore and steal books because it's the guy that I am. Here's the thing. I don't want you guys to think that I'm saying that my childhood resulted in my choices as an adult. That is not true. My choices as an adult are mine. I chose when I became an adult to victimize people. When you're a child, you can't help that. You're going to do what the adults in your circle are doing. But when I became an adult, oh yeah, that's all me. My sister, for example, she had the exact same upbringing that I did. Other than that one shoplifting experience, she goes off to be a great teacher, a great parent, a great citizen overall. Me, I'm just the guy that kept on going. And as I kept on going, I got more and more involved in the types of scams and hustles and frauds that not only my mom, but every single member on that side of the family was committing. I grew up knowing how to do charity fraud, knowing how to do insurance fraud, burning homes for cash, faking accidents, faking stolen cars, breaking and entering, trafficking drugs, illegally strip mining coal, forging documents, you name it. I grew up knowing how to do that. Until finally, I faked a car accident, mid-20s, enough to get the money to get married. Moved from Hazard, Kentucky to Lexington, Kentucky to go to university. And again, I'm the kid. I get the worst parts from my mom and my dad, that fear of being abandoned. I've never been able to show love in a healthy way in a relationship. So I told my wife, I was like, hey, look. You just worry about going to school. No, don't worry about getting a job. I got it. No, don't worry about the cooking or cleaning either. Kind of a control freak too. So here I am, 18-hour class load, all the cooking, all the cleaning, 60-hour-a-week job. Something had to give. What gave was the job. Well, with that proclivity toward fraud, you got to eat. Didn't really know how I was going to make the ends meet. I was doing these little scams around Lexington, Kentucky. Finally, I found the internet. And then I found eBay. Man, I like eBay. Didn't really know how to make money on eBay. Fortunately, Bill O'Reilly was around. He used to host Inside Edition back then, this little 30-minute TV news tabloid show, and they were profiling these things called Beanie Babies. How many people remember Beanie Babies? High-dollar collectible, mid to late 90s. The one they were profiling was Peanut, the royal blue elephant, selling for $1,500. I'm sitting there watching it like, $1,500? I need to find me a Peanut. Skip class the next day. Go around to all the little shops looking for Peanut. Takes me about 3 hours because I'm kind of naive. Takes me about 3 hours to figure out, well, idiot, he's not in the shops. His ass is on eBay for $1,500. But they did have these little gray Beanie Baby elephants for $8. Buy a gray Beanie Baby elephant for $8. Stop by a Kroger on the way home, pick up a pack of blue Rip dye. Go home and try to dye the little guy. Turns out they're made out of polyester. Don't hold the dye very well. Get them out of the bath, look like they've got the mange. Yeah, but here's the thing. I ripped a lady off of $1,500. Found a picture of a real one online. Posted it. She thought I had the real thing. She wins the bid. As soon as she wins the bid, social engineering kicks in. See, here's the thing about cybercrime. For cybercrime to succeed, social engineering is a necessity. I have to get you to trust me in order for me to get you to do what I want you to do. So as a child, I became a social engineer in order to survive my parental environments. All right? Most experienced cyber criminals do the same thing. Later on, as adults, we choose to use those tools to victimize other people. So she wins the bid. I want to put her on the defensive, not me. So I send her a message. Hey, lady! Congratulations, you win. Here's the thing. We've never done any business before. I don't even know if I can trust you. What I need you to do is go down to the U.S. Postal Service. Pick up a couple of money orders totaling $1,500. They're issued by the United States government. They protect you. They protect me. You send those to me. Once I get those, I'll send you your animal. She believed that. She sends me the money orders. I get them, cash them out, send her this creature in the mail, immediately get a phone call. This is not what I ordered. My response, lady, you ordered a blue elephant. I sent you a blue-ish elephant. And right there is the first lesson of cybercrime. That lesson is, if you delay a victim long enough, if you just keep putting them off, a lot of them get so exasperated, they throw their hands in the air, they walk away, you don't hear from them again, and guess what? They don't complain to law enforcement. they don't complain to law enforcement. First lesson of cybercrime. That's the first lesson that most online criminals learn right there. They don't complain to law enforcement. My victim did not, and I kept going. And as I kept going, I got better at understanding the dynamics of online fraud. Got to where I was selling mod chips. Mod chips turned into programming 18-inch RCA satellite systems. You can pull the card out of it, program it, turn on all the channels. Started doing that. At about the same time, a Canadian judge ruled it was legal for Canadian citizens to pirate those signals. He actually said it in court. Since my citizens, since they can't buy the system up here, it's legal for you to pirate it. Well, what happens is, in the overnight United States, little cottage industry pops up. You go down to Best Buy, buy the system for $100, take it out in the parking lot, open it up, pull the system out, pull the card out, throw the system away, program the card, ship it to Canada, $500 a pop. Started doing that, making a lot of money. Had so many orders, could not fill them all. Thought to myself, and I mean quickly thought to myself, why do I need to fill any of them? They're in Canada. I'm down here. Who are they going to complain to? It's illegal. So I didn't fill any of the orders, stole even more money. Got worried about how much was coming in. Figured the best thing I could do is get a fake driver's license, use that to open up a bank account, launder the money through that, cash out at the ATM. No idea where I was going to get a fake ID. So I got online. Looked around, thought I found a guy, sent him $200, sent him my picture, he rips me off. Yeah. I laugh about it, but I'm still pissed off about that today. Needless to say, I didn't complain to law enforcement either. The result, though, was Shadow Crew. I was so angry at that time that the result ends up being Shadow Crew. Before Shadow Crew, if you were looking at some sort of online crime, and all online crime is organized, it's never a single attacker which seeks to victimize you or your company. All online crime is organized. Before Shadow Crew, the only avenue you had to organize with other criminals was IRC, Internet Relay Chat, this rolling chat board where you had no idea who you were talking to, if they knew what they were talking about, if you could trust them, if they had a product or service, if they had it, if it worked, or if they were just going to rip you off because everyone there was a crook. Shadow Crew solved that. Shadow Crew gave a trust mechanism that criminals could use. Now you had a large communication channel in the form of a forum-type structure where individuals from different time zones could reference conversations days, weeks, months old, take part in those conversations, learn from those conversations. You knew by looking at someone's screen name what the skill level of that person was. If you could trust that person, learn from that person, work with that person. We had vouching systems in place, review systems in place, escrow systems in place, all with the singular purpose of establishing trust with one criminal and another when they would never meet, not know each other's real names, not even know what each other looked like. Shadow Crew was the first of its type. It was also the first eBay of criminal goods on the planet. Shadow Crew goes on to make the front cover of Forbes, August 2004, headline, Who's Stealing Your Identity? October 26, 2004, the United States Secret Service arrests 33 people, 6 countries, 6 hours. I'm the only guy publicly mentioned as getting away. They pick me up 4 months later, and they give me a job. And I'm the guy that continues to break the law from inside the Secret Service offices for the next 10 months. Until they find out about it, I take off on a cross-country crime spree, steal $600,000 in 4 months, make the United States Most Wanted list, go to Disney World, get arrested, sent to prison, escape from prison, get arrested again, finally serve out my time. As I said, there's a long story behind that, and it ends up with me being an ambassador for AARP, first chief criminal officer in the world. I'm in this week's Darknet Diaries, if anyone listens to that podcast. I lead a very fortunate life that I really don't deserve, but I'm really grateful to have. Moving along. When you look at why attackers, why are you being attacked? There's only really 3 motivations for online crime: status, cash, ideology. What do I mean by status? Can you do something that none of your other criminal peers can do? Realizing that some of these criminal communities are millions of members large. Let me give you an idea of how these things have advanced over the years. Shadow Crew gets shut down in 2004. We ended with 4,000 members. Fast forward to 2017. Alpha Bay is the largest criminal group on the planet, 240,000 members. Fast forward 2 more years to 2019. Just a dark web marketplace called Black Market is shut down, 1.15 million members. All of that is pre-pandemic. What happened during the pandemic? The government instituted stimulus programs with absolutely no security in place for at least 6 months. Every single fraudster on the planet, whatever fraud they were committing, they pivoted from that fraud to stimulus fraud, specifically unemployment fraud. Not only that, but you had all these massive numbers of new fraudsters coming into the environment as well. Now you've got single communities that are millions of members large. If you can do something that no one else in that community can do, then you gain the respect of that entire community, and that respect equates to profit. Can you use stolen credit card details to defraud Amazon or Apple when no one else can do that? If you can, you gain the respect of people. Can you build and deploy ransomware? Can you build and deploy skimmers? If you can do these types of things, then you gain the respect, which equates to more profit in those communities. Ideology. Is it possible you might be attacked because of your political beliefs? Well, I don't know about you guys, but I've been watching the news past 3 to 4 years, and it certainly seems like that. I wake up every morning, I tune into Fox News and CNN so I can start my day off pissed off at everybody. Yes, you can absolutely be attacked because of your beliefs. Most attacks, though, 98%, cash-based. Cash-based. Criminals are looking to profit. Easiest access that gives the largest return on the criminal investment. And that's fortunate because those types of attacks are the easiest attacks to combat. What are criminals looking for? Information, access, data, cash, information. What can I find out about you or your company? I worked with a virtual reality company a couple years ago. Had an attacker call into customer service, and the attacker social engineered the real names of the fraud team from that company. Once they did that, they found out the children's names. They started to do SWAT attacks. You guys know what that is? So it's when you call the police department and you say that, hey, John Doe over here at the house across from me, he's got his wife, a gun to her head. SWAT busts in. Sometimes people get killed, sometimes they don't. So they started to do SWAT attacks, bomb threats to the school. They made up fake websites about all the fraud team being criminals and everything else. And that attack continues to this day. So information. What can I find out about you? Can I call and trick you into giving me your social security number, your login credentials? Information, access. Can I call and get you to give me remote access to your computer? Can I get you to plug in a thumb drive on your computer? Data. Do you have something that I can steal? Do you invest in cryptocurrency? Can I get access to your computer and steal that data? Cash. Most of the time I'm wanting cash. Information, access, data, cash. Understand why an attacker is wanting to hit you, what they're wanting, and you'll understand how to design security to prevent that type of attack. I call this the criminal triangle. If you think about it, for cybercrime to succeed, 3 things have to take place. You have to gather data, you have to commit a crime, and then finally you have to cash it out. When I talk about gathering the data, that's the stolen PII. That's your social, your date of birth, your driver's license number, mother's maiden name. It's also any bank account information, your login credentials, but it's also any tool I may need to use. Spoofed phone calls, maybe a SOX 5 proxy. Maybe I'm physically located in South America someplace, but I need it to appear that I'm located in Minnesota. So I'll use a SOX 5 proxy. All that goes under the umbrella of gathering data. Once I have that done, I go off and commit the crime, and then finally cash that crime out. All 3 of these necessities have to work in conjunction. If they don't, the crime fails. The problem with that is that a single criminal, one attacker, can't do all 3 things. They can do one thing, sometimes 2. Very rarely can they do all 3, and there's a couple of reasons for that. The first is that specific criminal simply doesn't know how to do one of those things. Maybe they don't know how to do a man-in-the-middle attack. Maybe they don't know how to launch a phishing campaign, steal your credentials, something like that. Or maybe they can do it, but someone else on a marketplace is much better at it than they are. So that's number one, skill gap. The second reason that you don't see a criminal able to do all three things is because of a problem with geographic location. That criminal is simply in a geographic area where they cannot fulfill all three necessities. During the pandemic, because I like talking about pandemic fraud, during the pandemic, we had a lot of fraudsters that were hitting unemployment systems across all 50 states. Those fraudsters were in the United States, but they were also in the Ukraine, they were in Russia, they were in the EU, they were down in Brazil. Now here's the thing, they had all the data in the world because everyone's information is available. Committing the crime, very easy because there was absolutely no security in place whatsoever. In fact, the CARES Act took away what security was in place, all right? So there was no security in place. So the fraudsters had those two necessities done. But here's the problem. If I'm in the Ukraine and I'm filing unemployment claims for the state of Minnesota, yeah, I can file it. It will fund. But what happens when I go to withdraw that money and that money's been withdrawn in the Ukraine? That's a problem. So I have to rely on money mules stateside to withdraw that currency for me. So those are the reasons that you see that the three necessities is always multiple attackers seeking to victimize you or your company. What about the person themselves? I would argue for a criminal to engage in online crime, three things have to be inherent: willingness, knowledge, ego. What do I mean by willingness? Simply put, what is that criminal willing or not willing to do? Take an identity thief. I may be more than willing to compromise your identity in the back. Use your identity to open up new accounts, HELOC loans, student loan fraud, what have you. Cash out your retirement funds, everything else. But that same identity thief may not be willing to compromise the identity of a senior citizen and divert their Social Security payment from whatever bank account it's being deposited to over to a prepaid debit card they picked up at Walmart for $10. That crime is extremely easy to commit, but we don't see the numbers on it that would indicate such. Why? Why is because that moral compass sometimes points north just enough that that criminal realizes that if I steal that, it's going to take them 3 months to get everything fixed up. How are they going to pay the bills? How are they going to eat? I'll find a different target. So willingness. Ego. At the end of the day, as an attacker, as a criminal, I have to believe that I can defeat a billion-dollar company or a billion-dollar security company. That is basically David versus Goliath. But here's the thing. I can be more than willing to commit any crime on the planet. I can have the biggest ego on the planet. But if I don't have the knowledge on how to commit that specific crime, I am useless. And that, along with the need to network with criminals, is why you see the dark web and surface web groups, the marketplaces, the forums. They exist so that those criminals can network with each other, and that so those criminals can learn from each other, so they can learn how to do those specific types of frauds and crimes. Today, for example, you can go on the dark web, you can go on Telegram. You can buy a tutorial for as low as $10 that teaches you step-by-step how to commit one specific type of fraud. If you're not comfortable with the tutorial, that's fine. You can take a live instruction class. A live instruction class, a master fraudster will take you by the hand and they will walk you through one specific type of fraud. It costs anywhere from $300 to $3,000. And it comes with a guarantee. When this class is over, if you're not making money, I will refund you your tuition. And they mean it, because that's the way things operate today. You don't even have to do that if you don't want. You can simply hang out on the forums and ask questions, and typically someone will help you engage in the type of fraud or crime you want to commit. Another way to look at why attackers seek to victimize you is the MICE principle. Money, ideology, conscience, ego. Where are you motivated? Where is the attacker motivated? Is the attacker motivated by money, ideology, maybe some sort of conscience, or ego, or a combination of more than one of those? Me, I am mostly in ego and ideology. Third is money. Fourth is conscience, is with me. The MICE principle is what the CIA teaches that on how to work with operatives, things like that, and informants. So if you're looking at how to judge somebody, how to figure out their motivations. Mice does a pretty good job of that as well. All right. What you see is that cybercrime is not really rocket science. It's not really sophisticated. I know we see a lot of the media that's out there that says that, hey, you got to watch out for these hackers. You got to watch out for these hackers. They're untouchable. They're ghosts in the system. You ain't never going to catch them. They're computer geniuses. That's what most of the media talks about. 7,500 security companies out there say basically the same thing. They are untouchable ghosts in the system. That is not true. You have some of those types of attackers, 1 to 2%. The 98 to 99% of cyber criminals, and I don't use the word hackers, I use the word cyber criminals, the 98, 99%, they're just very good social engineers. They know what it takes to manipulate you into giving up information, access, data, or cash. All right? One of the things we hear about a lot of times in the media are zero-day attacks, these unknown vulnerabilities. How can we protect against something we don't even know about? I will tell you this. In my 20-year history as a cyber criminal, I had access to 2 0 days. That's an unknown vulnerability. That's an attack that only I know about. I had access to 2, only one of which resulted in profit, and that's over a 20-year span. Any criminal that's out there that's looking for a 0 day to profit will starve to death. What I am worried about, and what you should be worried about too, is this right here. 90% plus of every single attack uses known exploits. 90%. It's not the stuff we don't know about. It's the stuff we do know about, the stuff we've potentially been told about for years that causes the problem, the stuff we've not done anything about. 90%. I don't care if that's a nation-state attack. The 2 largest cyber attacks in history are NotPetya and SolarWinds. Both those attacks were launched by the Russian government. One is against the Ukraine country, the other one against the United States. SolarWinds is the backbone of the Fortune 500 companies in the United States. All right, the 2 largest attacks used known exploits. Not computer geniuses, known exploits. That's nation-state attacks. That's the people that are in their mom's basements that are stealing your credit card numbers. It's known exploits. 56% of companies have experienced a breach because of third-party access. Think about that. Your system at work or at home is only as strong as the weakest device which accesses it. That's what this basically means, all right? 56% of companies. Marriott got hit because of a third party that was accessing their system, their network. Most companies have no idea how many third parties are accessing their systems. Of those third parties which are accessing their systems, none of those third parties are vetted. This is what creates those problems online. 41% of every single router has the default password. 41%. That's at your house, that's at your bank. Any idea what you can do with a router with the default password? I mean, it's not pretty. I mean, it's pretty for the attackers. It's not pretty for the good guys. That doesn't even count the billions of IoT devices out there that are hard-coded or have the default password. 92% of every single breach begins with a phishing attack. Why? Why would I spend years trying to brute force my way past an industrial-proof firewall when the only thing I need to do is send an email to someone sitting behind that firewall? Saves me time, effort, money, gives me the exact same access. And how successful is phishing? Well, if you're talking spear phishing, if I'm looking to target you specifically, it's about 87% effective. 87%. I don't care. I do not care how much cybersecurity awareness training you've got, how rich, how poor, how educated, how uneducated you are. It's still 87% effective. Now, why is that? Some people say there is no patch for human stupidity. Now, that's a cute line, but that is not true. It's not true. It gets a chuckle, but it's not true. It's got nothing to do with ignorance. Nothing. It's got to do with an attacker who understands human psychology and technology enough to manipulate you into giving up information, access, data, cash. If you don't believe me, let's test it out. I've got 2 email addresses here. Don't worry, I'm going to blow them up here in a second. So the first is gollum@anglerfish.com. The second is gollum@anglerfish.com. First email address blown up, gollum@anglerfish.com. Second email address, gollum@anglerfish.com. Can anyone see the difference between the two email addresses? Just scream it out there. The dot, somebody said dot on an I. Who said that? What is that? That is not an English alphabet I. It's not. That's been known about for years, though. We've known about that for a decade. That's what's called a Unicode domain. That's not an English alphabet I, but it registers just fine. Now, if you're an attacker, and I know you're checking your email using this thing right here, are you going to notice that a dot is not above an I? Probably not. If you're working payroll and you're going through 200 to 300 emails a day, are you going to notice that a dot is not above an I? No, you're not. But that right there, that we've known about for a decade, that's $7 million a day. That's $12 billion. That is the number one way that business email compromise is committed today. It's not the stuff we don't know about. It's the stuff we do know about, we're not doing anything about, that causes the problem. A lot of phishing attacks are all about identity theft. Shadow Crew, the group that I ran, was also a teaching environment. This is one of the top lessons that we taught. All crime should begin with identity theft. Why would I commit a crime under my name if I can do it under your name? Especially if you're local. That way it's kind of like early warning services. I get a warning, and I can move on to the next victim. All crime should begin with identity theft. What most attackers are looking for is PII, your credentials, your bank information, your credit card numbers, ways to get money from you is what they're looking for. Today, and I usually get this question in the presentation, what can we do to make sure that our information is not compromised? The answer is nothing. Nothing. Your information has been compromised for years. Last year alone, we had 2,570 reported breaches. Of those just reported breaches, 57 billion records compromised just last year. Everyone's information is available. If you can accept that, then you can ask the logical question, okay, since my information is available, what can I do to make sure a criminal can't use it if they get it? And we'll answer that, all right? Today, I can go on the dark web. I can buy someone's complete identity profile from a low of $30 to a high of about $140, depending on the gender, the credit score, location of the victim. Children are the number one victims of identity theft. 1 in 4, 25%. That's tax fraud, synthetic fraud, medical fraud. Today, I can buy a child's identity for $2.08. For that $2, I get the child's name, social, date of birth, mother's maiden name, place of birth, $2.08. Everyone's information is available. If I can't buy it ready-made, then I can make it. And there's a step-by-step. I go on the dark web. I buy your bank account details. For me to take over that account, I need your complete identity profile. If I can't get what's called TLO or DelvePoint, which is skip tracing software that gives me a complete background check, then I need to do it manually. The way I do it manually, I go over to a website like robocheck.cm. It's a criminal database. Lists the social security numbers and dates of birth of 170 million Americans, $3.80 a piece. Buy your social, date of birth there. From there, I start using legal services, Ben Verified, Spokio, Intellius, White Pages Pro. I get your background check and the background check of every single associates of yours in the hopes of getting your mother's maiden name, which I'll get. Once I get that, it's time to get your credit report. Where do I go? Same place you go, annualcreditreport.com. Why? Well, they ask security questions, but there's no time limit on the security questions. So I can sit there with the background check, with Google, try to get the answers. If I don't get the answer, am I worried? No, I'm not. Because then I go over to Credit Karma, where they ask the exact same questions, except the answers are different, except for the correct answers. So now I've got your credit report. From there, LinkedIn to find out where you work, Glassdoor to find out how much you make, Facebook to find out if you've posted anything of interest, and that is your ass. I can do whatever I want to at that point in time. It's that easy. That takes about 20 minutes total. Everyone's information is available. I don't care. It's important you realize that. I don't care how rich, how poor, how educated, how uneducated, how important, how unimportant you are. To illustrate such, I have taken the opportunity to pulling up the information of one Donald J. Trump, because I too believe in making America great again. Hashtag MAGA, hashtag no one's safe, hashtag is that even legal? I don't know. But I do know that's his social security number. I know that's his date of birth, and I know that is $3.80. Everyone's information is available. And no, I am not political. I am not political. Well, Brett, it sure seems like you're political. No, I'm not political. To illustrate such, I have taken the opportunity of pulling up the information of the puppet master herself, Nancy P. Pelosi. Because, why not? Oh, wait a second, Brett. Okay, it's got her social there, but it don't have her date of birth. Oh, man. Where on earth can I find Nancy P. Pelosi's date of birth? How about a Google check? Everyone's information is available. It doesn't matter who you are. Everyone. So once I have your information, what can I do? Well, I can put it on a fake driver's license if I need to, go out and commit crimes with it. These days, I don't need a physical fake ID because most of the time I'm verifying ID online. I don't want my face on an ID, so this ID comes from secondeyesolution.ch. Costs $40. Looks great, passes all the background checks, any type of verification you need to as well. Looks good, $40. But wait a second, Brett. You know, a lot of these, you go to a bank, you go to a crypto company, PayPal, sometimes they want you to send a selfie in with the ID. How are you going to handle that? Do I look like I'm worried? No. Do I look like I'm worried? No. Pay this guy another $10, he'll take the selfie with the ID. You want to know why cybercrime succeeds? It's stuff like this, but it gets better. It gets better. Is there a security service that you're trying to bypass? If there is, just click the box. Criminals these days don't have to know anything in order to go in and succeed. I can set up PayPal, I can set up Coinbase, anything else, and bypass any security they've got with fake IDs for $50. That's why cybercrime succeeds. Okay? If you think about it, it boils down to trust. I heard the speaker before me, she was talking about trust. In order for me to victimize you, I must get you to trust me. In order for me to get you to give me information, access, data, or cash, I have to get that potential victim to trust me enough to do that. If I can't do that, that victim will not trust me. So how is trust established online? I would say that trust is established through technology, tools, social engineering. Technology. It's your cell phone, it's your laptop, it's your desktop computer. We inherently trust the technology which is given to us. We don't understand it a lot of the time, but we trust it. We trust the news that comes across the line. It's the problem with fake news, right? We don't verify. We just, oh, yeah, that works, yeah. What we don't understand is that criminals use a variety of tools to manipulate that technology. They use spoofed phone calls, so you don't see the phone number that they're calling from. You see the phone number of your financial institution, the sheriff's office, the IRS, the Social Security Administration. They use SOX 5 proxies, so they may be physically located in Ghana, Nigeria, South America, Florida. They can make it appear that they're in Canada, Minnesota, California, wherever they want to make it appear. That tends to just open the door to the scheme or the fraud. It layers a base level of trust. Once that base level of trust is layered, once the door is opened, then we see how good of a con man, how good of a liar, how good of a social engineer that criminal is in manipulating you and giving up information, access, data, or cash. I'll give you an example. It's called an ATO, an account takeover. Excuse me. When I was a criminal, the types of accounts that we looked to take over, that we wanted, were bank accounts and credit card accounts. These days, most every account has value to a criminal. That's your merchant accounts, that's your credit reports, that's your tax records. Everything has value to a criminal. But back then, when I was a criminal, what we would do is I'd pick up the phone. I'd already have your complete identity profile, all right? I'd pick up the phone, I would spoof your phone number, and then I'd call into your financial institution. I'd call into your bank. when I'm calling in, your phone number is going to show up on the customer service agent's screen. Base level of trust, all right? I'm going to call in. I'm just going to ask one question. What's my available balance on the account? Customer service agent is going to ask me 2 questions. One of those questions is going to be mother's maiden name. Now, I've got your mother's maiden name, but I'm going to miss it on purpose, all right? I'm going to say any other name at all, but I'm going to say it with confidence. Johnson! I'm sorry, that's not what we've got, sir. Huh? Well, what do you got? Sorry, sir, we're not going to tell you what we've got. Well, look, I don't know what you got, but I know what my mom's name is. What are you guys even doing over there? So what happens at that point in time? At that point in time, customer service, they ask you 2 more questions, which I have the answers to. I get those questions right, then what happens? Then they change the mother's maiden name to whatever I want them to change the mother's maiden name to. As I'm hanging up, now that's not why I'm calling. The reason I'm calling is to take over the account. To take over the account, I need to make sure that the phone number on file is my phone number, not yours. So after I go through all that rigmarole, as the customer service agent is hanging up, oh, by the way, can you change my phone number that's on file? Yes, sir, we can do that. That's typically the way an account takeover, and it still works to that degree today. Why does it work like that? Okay, technology, tools, social engineering. Customer service trust the technology that's in front of them, that computer terminal. They trust all the information that's coming across the screen to be correct information. What that customer service agent doesn't realize is that I'm using a tool, a spoofed phone number, to manipulate that technology. I call in, they see the phone number that's on file calling into the account. Base level of trust already established. Now, if I were to call in immediately at that point and say, hey, I'm just trying to change my phone number, the chances of that customer service agent doing that is almost 0. They're going to boot me up to higher security. I want that customer service agent to do it. So what I do is I distract. I cause a diversion. I cause a problem. We fix the problem together, layering more trust along the way. I cause the problem by I don't know what my mother's maiden name is. I've got the wrong information. I fix that problem by answering more knowledge-based security questions, layering more trust with that customer service agent, distracting the customer service agent from my primary purpose of changing the phone number on file. Now, I know that that customer service agent probably gets 200 to 300 calls a day. Once they fix that problem of mother's maiden name, give me available balance, they're already looking forward to the next call. They've mentally disengaged from me. It's at that point there that I strike. Can you update my phone number on file? Yes, sir, we can do that. Now, how effective is that? It's so effective that I've actually done that before and been asked, why are you updating the phone number on file? And my reasoning has been, I no longer have that phone number. I no longer have the phone number that's showing up on the screen in front of the customer service agent. That's how this stuff works. A scam is successful because I'm trying to get you to react emotionally. I'm trying to make sure your reason, your logic is set to the side. You're giving me a knee-jerk reaction. You're responding to me emotionally. You're trusting me. That's how these things work and operate. The conclusion, we're all screwed. No, we're not. We're not. Just as cybercrime itself is not sophisticated, it's not really sophisticated to protect yourself from the type of person that I used to be. It's not. It starts with freezing the credit of every single person in the house. Everybody. Everybody. Credit freezes have been free since September 18th, 2018, thanks largely to AARP. Free. If you don't do anything else today, freeze the credit of every single person in the house, including children, because children are the #1 victims of identity theft, 1 in 4. It's free, all right? The sad thing about that, the United States population that has a credit freeze in place, 12.9%. So please, if you don't do anything else today, freeze the credit of every single person in the house. A credit freeze stops all new account fraud. Works great for kids. For adults, we've got existing accounts, existing credit cards, things like that. So you have to monitor your accounts, place alerts on those accounts where you can. For example, Discover Card has a $0 alert, meaning that if I go on the dark web, buy your Discover Card for $12, you get a text message saying, hey, some idiot's trying to steal your card number. you can have it locked down at that point. So monitor accounts, place alerts, freeze credit. The big one, how many people use the same or similar passwords and logins across multiple websites? Come on, it's all right. It's all right. It's all right. It's like an AA meeting. Hi, I'm Brett Johnson. 80%. 80%. 80% of every single person on the planet uses the same or similar passwords and logins. The problem with that is if I send a phishing email that looks like it comes from Bank of America, your level of awareness is high enough that you're like, not going to fall for that. Obviously a phishing email. But what if I send a phishing email that looks like it comes from Hulu? Level of awareness is high? No. Probably going to look at it and say, Hulu? Anyone even watch Hulu? Only thing it got's The Handmaid's Tale. Second season sucked. And it did. It did. Anybody who's watching it, stop at the first season. It's horrible after that. The problem with, if you're using the same credentials, it's an automated attack for me. I go to sleep, plug in those credentials in the computer, it tries to log into tens of thousands of sites while I sleep. I wake up the next morning, I've got your bank account, your credit cards, your tax records, credit reports, Hulu account, everything that I need. The answer right now is a password manager. Password manager, authenticator program, something like that, okay? Understand your place in the cybercrime spectrum, because you have one. The way that I will victimize you absolutely depends on who you are and what you do. Absolutely it does. If you're CEO or payroll, I will attack you differently than if you've worked in the service industry for 20 years. I'll still get you. Understand why and how. Design security around that. Never act in desperation. I can't emphasize that enough. Desperation leads to poor choices. If you've got somebody on the end of the line and they're causing you to feel fear, anger, anxiety, stress, anything else like that, that should be a red flag from hell right there to hang up, especially if they tell you not to hang up. All right? Never react out of desperation or emotionally. So then it's important to take a step back, to try to gain some logic and some reason, to take a breath, count to 10. I'll call you back. That'll give you reason and time enough to think. Better yet, find a buddy. If you don't have a buddy, find an enemy. Sometimes the best friend in the world is your worst enemy. Call Joe down the street. Joe, I know you hate me. Does this sound right to you? And Joe's going to say, no, you're an idiot even for falling for that. Find a friend, if you don't have either. There's this great thing called AARP's Fraud Watch. I promise you, you can call them. They'll pick up the phone. They'll walk you through that scam, what you do, how to handle it, how to take care of everything that's going on right there. All right? Find a buddy, find a friend. Take a breath. Don't act in desperation. That's what's important about this stuff. Trust but verify. I can't really emphasize that enough. I don't believe in leading our lives paranoid and scared of things. I don't believe in that. I was a criminal for most of my life. But I can tell you that leading a paranoid or a life of fear that you're going to be victimized is not the way to live. Absolutely trust, but absolutely verify everything across the board. All right? That's the presentation. I want to end with 2 more points here. Always report to law enforcement. If you have the ability to press charges, always press charges. Regardless of whether you have the ability to press charges, always report to law enforcement. IC3, if you don't know who to report to, you can call AARP's Fraud Watch. They'll help you there as well. Report to your local police. Always report. It may seem like sometimes they're not doing everything they can. They do every single thing they can every single day. All right? It's just that they're overwhelmed by these numbers. And it's important that we build cases and get the correct data going to give these officers the correct information they need to press charges. All right? Finally, identity theft protection services, because I always get a question on that, and that's going to be the presentation. A lot of people ask, what about ID theft protection services? I don't have anything against them. All right? I believe that we need to take a proactive stance on our security. That's my first and foremost thought. It's not their accounts they're protecting. It's your account they're protecting. You should know what's going on with your account as well. If you can use a free service, by all means, use a free service. There are some free ones out there. If you will be to pay for one, if you find that a free service is not robust enough, make sure you do your research. Make sure that the data that they're pulling is real-time data. Make sure that whatever company you're signing on with has not been hit with a slew of class action lawsuits. Pick a legitimate company, all right? That is my presentation. I'm going to be hanging around to answer questions. I've got a gentleman back here raising his hand already.
Have you written a book or produced a CD that people can purchase?
I am writing a book right now, sir. Actually, I just signed the contract with my literary agent about 3 weeks ago, and we're going to have a book out hopefully in about a year, and then go from there. You can. That being said, I have a podcast, The Brett Johnson Show. I'm on AARP's podcast. I'm on one episode of that. I'm going to be on another episode in the near future as well. You're welcome to reach out to me on LinkedIn. You can find me on Facebook, anything else, and you can also rely on AARP's Fraud Watch as well. All right, anybody needs anything at all, I really do mean it when I say I'll help you to the best of my ability. I really do mean that, okay? Thank you so much.
Excellent. Thank you. Well, thanks very much, Brett. That was a fantastic presentation. Tons of great information, of course, but one I'll highlight, in my experience, is really important to understand that even though so much of our lives are automated and we're dealing online on the computer all day long, it's the attacker behind the technology that is victimizing us. So it seems like the computer is very mysterious, but behind that screen is an attacker that's coming after us, attacking us as humans, not trying to break into the machine. I want to thank all of the organizations that made today's program possible. You saw them at the expo tables out in the lobby, and we're so glad to be back partnering with you and working together to fight all this fraud. Of course, the Better Business Bureau, our very excellent partner in putting on this event and so many over the years. Brett and Marti and Dr. Diliema, fantastic information. We thank you. And we thank the staff here at the event center. I think they did a fantastic job. So let's please give them a round of applause. Yeah, we appreciate the hospitality. Megan Hannon with the Better Business Bureau.